This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a special guest. I have enjoyed watching his rise in the fantasy sports industry so much. I've seen it firsthand. It's been exciting to see from Fantasy Pros. It's the one and only Andrew Erickson. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Kevin, I'm so happy to be here. As I was talking to you before, when I first hopped on, Kevin slid into my DMs probably like months and months ago about like organizing this. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like I'll come on. And then I looked at my DMs. I was like, oh my God, I never responded back to Kevin. So I made sure I was like, no, I need to respond. We need to get something set up so I can get onto the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. And here I am. We're making it happen here in February.
I'm excited to have you on here. When I think of individuals in the fantasy space that have just truly wanted to get a full-time job and a full-time position in the industry, more than anything in this world, I think of you. I've seen it, again, I've seen it firsthand. Your drive, determination, it's always stood out to me. This goes back to when I first met you in Fort Worth, Texas. We're talking the National Fantasy Football Convention, right? 2018.
Throwback,
good times,
baby.
right? Good times.
Absolute throwback.
For sure. And let's go back to then. Like take me back to your mindset back in the day when you decided to travel across the country and attend that event. What were you doing at the time? How did you hear about the event? What were you expecting to get from it? And what was your experience attending that event, the National Fantasy Football Convention?
And it seems like such a long, it seems like such a long time ago, but I mean, 2018, I was working I had a full-time job in marketing, and I just didn't really enjoy. And it's like my passion was always with sports and specifically with fantasy sports. And, what I did learn attending business school is one of the most important rules of business in terms of finding a job is networking. Like, it's like the number one thing people always ask, like, how do I find a job? How do I get a job? It's like, well, who do you know? And it's funny because it's just totally a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason because it's true. It's really about less of what you can do and more about who do you know. Now, obviously, once you get into the building, then it's about showcasing your skill set and your strengths, and that's how you convince, a employer to bring you on. But just to get into the building, it's more like, well, who do you know that works here? And if you ask any job, every job I've had in fantasy or non-fantasy has been because I knew I had some type of connection. And I'm sure that a lot of viewers and listeners are going to probably agree. It's like, yeah, I work at this job because I knew so-and-so, this was, my friend's friend or et cetera. So that was my goal, was I want to go to this conference because this is an opportunity for me to network, to build my connections in the fantasy space. And this is where I can find opportunities, because sending out resumes was not doing anything for me. And there was I didn't know there were dead ends essentially. Whereas if I go to this place, I could put myself face to face, and maybe there's no jobs. Maybe there's nothing available at the moment, but I wanted to make sure that the minute that something opens up at X company here, that I was at the top of the board, at the top of the candidates to fill that hole. Because, hey, I remember Andrew Erickson because he was up my butt at this convention. He would not stop talking to me about, oh, I want to work in the full-time industry, in the fantasy space full-time. And I wanted to continue to pursue that. So I did that at that convention. I did it again at the FSGA, paying my way there out of pocket to get there, going to New York, going to Las Vegas, like doing whatever it took to like put myself in a position to find success and to almost kind of create my own luck. Again, people a lot of times will try to wait for opportunities, but I really tried to take advantage of like, hey, I'm going to try to create my own opportunities by going to these several conferences.
Yeah, I mean, you got to make things happen. Obviously, you're right. Connections are a huge part of it, but you got to make those connections. In getting uncomfortable, put yourself out there. Obviously, it's paid dividends for you. And like I said, it's been exciting to see it happen. And I love going back to thinking about that event. What are some of your favorite memories from the NFFC? Because you were there with like Nate Hamilton, and
Yep.
you met several people there, obviously, right?
Yep, Nate Hamilton, Mitchell Renz is another name that comes up. Because this was in Fort Worth, right? In
Yes,
Texas,
yes.
yeah. So one of the few times I've been to Texas, always had a good time there. But yeah, I remember kind of being in this like big gymnasium with like a lot of these things being set up. I remember getting, I think I got one of the Gronkowski brothers, like one of their
Yeah.
autographs, not Rob,
They're doing
not
the shake thing,
yeah,
right?
doing
Like,
the
yeah,
shaker, either
yeah,
Chris
yeah.
or one of the Dan Gronkowski, one of the Gronkowski brothers. I remember meeting Ross Tucker, because he had one of those booths, and I also remember some of the nightlife events were a lot of fun. Some NFL
Yeah.
players ended up showing up. I think that Michael Irving was at one of them. Todd Gurley, I think. Again, Todd Gurley. It's like, who's that guy? It's like Todd Gurley when he was good in fantasy football.
I mean, that was that he was at the top of his game at that point, right?
He was the top of his game, and now you see him walking down the street and be like, who is that guy? Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't even know who he is. So Todd Gurley attended the event. And I think too, it like also brought me back to the fact that at this time, like sports gambling was still not necessarily accepted by the NFL. Again, I think a few years before then, Tony Romo had gotten like in trouble for trying to go to a convention. And I don't think was the fantasy football convention that he got in trouble for, but a couple years before, I think Romo was supposed to go to a fantasy football convention and couldn't go because it had to do with like gambling. And it's like, okay. And now, of course, the NFL is like in bed with a lot of these sports books, basically making money. You can't watch football without being bombarded with a DraftKings or FanDuel ad. That's just kind of the way it is and how things have evolved. But back then, 2018, like there was nothing like this. So yeah, just all good memories of friends. And I think that a lot of people that had the similar passion to me in terms of like, we're trying to get after it. Like it wasn't as much as like, oh, let's have fun. That was part of it, but it was more people like, hey, I'm on a mission here. I think Derek Brown also was there as well,
Hmm.
Texas
Yep.
native. And so I got to meet the D-Bro, the king of bros. So I now get the glory and the benefit of working with full time over at Fantasy Pros.
That's awesome. You know, it actually was the Tony Romo
Oh,
type event.
that
It
was
was
it.
his
Okay.
cousin that kind of ran it, and it was the same event that previously was denied, and that was like when it finally was able to happen. It was the National Fantasy Football Convention in Fort Worth. Supposed to be Dallas, but it got transferred to Fort Worth. It was wild. It truly was wild. There was so many, like you said, there was D-Bro was there, Casey Kasem was there, so many people from the industry that were there. Like the footballers were there. Matthew Berry, Liz Loza, Brandon Funston, Brad Evans, like even like the fantasy football counselor was there.
Actually,
Like
I
it was
think
chaos.
too. I think because when you mentioned Field Yates was there, I'm pretty
Yeah, he
sure
was.
Field Yates was on my flight back to New England, because he's obviously works for ESPN, so he's
Yeah.
from the New England area. Because it was 2018, so this was the year before Patrick Mahomes like takeover of NFL football, and I remember having conversation at the airport because I saw Field Yates because I was like, oh my god, he's on my plane, I got to talk to him. So again, went up to him, did my spiel about like, hey, how do I break into the industry, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that stuck with that he said, and I think he called it, and I don't think I never got the chance to talk to Field Yates again. But this is something I would definitely bring up, and he probably wouldn't remember me. But he told me, he was like, hey, again, obviously you want to go to conferences like this. I think you're taking all the right steps. And he also said to me, he's like, don't afraid to be like different or afraid to be wrong. Like, that's not necessarily like be a hot take artist, but if you think that you have confidence behind a take, like really go for it. And the example he used was Patrick Mahomes being like a top 5 fantasy quarterback that year. So if you think Patrick Mahomes can be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, you should say it. And I was like, damn, Field, you freaking called that. Because then obviously what we see now from Mahomes, 3-time Super Bowl champion, at the top of every single fantasy quarterback rankings. Yeah, Field Yates. What a guy.
Unbelievable. Yeah, he's as good as it gets, as real and as authentic as it gets. I love that you have that story. And yeah, Patrick Mahomes was at that event. So it was wild. It was fun. It's fun to look back on it and see, all the people that, that I met there and the relationships that have formed since then. But let's go back even a little further. Obviously, you have a passion for sports. Where did that all begin?
Yeah, so it definitely came from my parents. Growing up, huge Patriots fans, huge football fans. My dad played offensive line in college. My mom was a athlete in track and a bunch of other sports. So they kind of brought that up on me, and especially with the passions with the Patriots. And again, I was born into the glory years where I basically woke up when I was able to register what was going on. The Patriots were just winning championships left and right, so it was really easy. So now we're in this really weird, bizarro world where the Patriots aren't good anymore. They're picking 3rd overall in the NFL draft. So again, at this point, it's kind of nice because I can kind of take a step back from my fandom and really look at things more from an analyst standpoint. Because again, like the team's not good. So it's like, I don't care if they lose or win. It doesn't matter to me. And when whoever they end up picking 3rd overall, like I'm going to look at it not from a fan's perspective, but from a analytical analysis. Okay, did this make sense? Should they do here? So again, it was a fun run for sure. I mean, most teams never get anything like this, any type of dynasty run. We got 20 plus years of Bill Belichick, Tom Brady. It was obviously a ton of fun to watch and be part of, and be part of growing up. Like, I'm never going to think about growing up as a kid and be like, oh yeah, the Patriots. Like, that's part of my growing up story in New England from, in the 2000s up until, 2020, 2019, Brady's last years here. So that's really it. That's kind of my sports background. And then playing baseball was my primary sport, Red Sox, just a Boston Homer fan for the most part.
Well, I tell you, as a Seahawks fan and someone who experienced Super Bowl 49, like I feel bad for you. Like, this is rough. My heart breaks for what you're experiencing now. No, just kidding. It is strange. It's the weirdest kind of time to grow up as a fan and experiencing what you did, because it's rarely ever been seen. I don't, there's not many things like it when it comes to the run the Patriots had.
It's created a very privileged group of individuals in
Yeah.
Boston that I'm not necessarily proud to be clumped in together. I try to not be like them, but unfortunately, my age group and demographic kind of just like puts me into that. Well, no, you probably are a privileged Patriots fan because now you're complaining that your team's not good anymore when they were good for 20 years.
It's just part of the deal. I love it. What is your worst loss as a sports fan? I mean, there probably hasn't been too many, but I'm sure there's something.
I mean, it's got to be the Patriots loss against the Giants in 2007.
The undefeated.
Yeah. I mean, look, again, it's one of these things I think about, would I trade all the Super Bowls the Patriots won for that one win, for them to be unequivocally 19-0, the best team of all time, no debate. Like, would I make that trade? And it's like, man, I don't know. Like, that's tough to be like the best team again, because I don't think they'll necessarily be viewed as the best dynasty. Potentially, I think that they're kind of in that conversation of just the dynasty of that era. But yeah, I think that that's something I would look very hard at and be like, man, that team just won that game. It's like perfect 19-0. That would have been something special.
I mean, you got maybe 3 or 4. Trade 3 or 4 of
Yeah,
them. You have so many, right?
Because we'll trade all the Patriots ones. Brady will still have his Buccaneers one, so we'll be good.
I love it. What is your all-time favorite sports moment as a fan?
Not to like rub salt in your wound. I mean, the Malcolm Butler interception was pretty good. That's not the one I put though. I didn't even think about that. The one that I put, it's got to be the 28-3 against the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, that game was just, every type of emotion you could be on, from basically, oh my God, this team's going to lose. Like, it's over. And I just got to experience this with my fiance and some of her friends. It's just like a small group of us watching this game, and just like the sheer emotion of every single play up and down after halftime. It's like the Falcons scored again. It would be that 28-3 game that, I'll never forget. But as an honorable mention, the Seahawks Patriots Super Bowl. I just have to say, I watched this game. I was in London at the time. I was studying abroad in London. So at the time of the game, I think it was like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And just like watching the game at a sports bar, 19 years old, where you were allowed to legally drink overseas. It's like absolute madness, especially from, being a couple Americans at a bar where most people were English and they were just like yelling at the TV, the British accents, didn't really know what was going on. But that was definitely a big memory as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I probably talked too much about that event on this podcast, so I'll avoid from diving deep into that one. But the 28-3, just watching like the Lions-Niners game and the Niners come back in the second half in the playoffs just recently, it made me think about like how incredible was it that they pulled that 28-3 comeback in the Super Bowl? Like, that's such an incredible thing that we kind of take for granted just because it's Brady and he's magical, but unbelievable, like truly unbelievable. And then the way that it happened, it was so kind of like slow and methodical, like just from the start of the second half, it just kind of touchdown, field goal, touch. It was wild.
It's something too, like I don't remember the last time I watched that game or like saw highlights from that game, but it's like you could, the score in your mind, like the final score. You could like sit down and watch that game and be like, wait, so like when are the Patriots going to start to come back? Like I know the Patriots win this game, but then you look at the scoreboard, you look at the time on the clock, you're like, wait, they won this game? Like, how did this happen? So maybe that's something I need to carve. I know that I have not dabbled into the Patriots Dynasty series that just dropped on Apple TV. It's something that I really want to watch, but I'm sure they hit on the Patriots Falcons Super Bowl matchup somewhere in the documentary.
More fun, more stuff for you to enjoy. Like,
of course.
I love it. So when did you first discover fantasy sports?
So for me, it came during that 2007 season when the Patriots went undefeated in the regular season, at least. That was the first time I ever played fantasy football. I was in a fantasy football league with my dad. He set it up, and we co-managed a team with some of my aunts, uncles, cousins on my dad's side of the family. And I famously drafted the Bears defense with my first round pick. Again, was a total newbie, didn't know what I was doing, but it was again the Bears. I was drafted in the 2006 Bears, elite defense that got to the Super Bowl against Peyton Manning. So I was like, all right,
Yeah.
they got Devin Hester. He's going to score a bunch of touchdowns. Like, this will be easy. This did not work out that way. I also drafted Reggie Bush and Lawrence Maroney with my next two picks. So again, just a very memorable time for me because again, my fantasy innocence, I guess the way I would say it, is like didn't know what I was doing. I drafted Calvin Johnson because I liked his name because I thought it sounded like it was close to Chad Johnson. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just draft Calvin Johnson. And he ended up being a beast. So that was really fun. And then my dad along the way was like, I'm going to let you rest as a team. Like, he didn't override me with certain things. He tried to help me here and there, but for the most part, he let me manage the team, kind of like take my lumps with everything, but also be like, hey, let's not draft Matt Leinart. Let's draft somebody else like quarterback. So it was a great opportunity to bond with my father, obviously, who was a person that introduced me to the game of football. And yeah, it was really my first exposure to fantasy, and I absolutely loved it because I actually ended up winning the league. So maybe I didn't fall in love with fantasy because of the sport, because I fell in love with winning, and I've been playing since 2007.
That's awesome. Do you remember like the early days of consuming content? Who you were, whose content you liked and discovered early on?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really more like whose content was I not consuming? Like, especially when I graduated from college, I was really only playing fantasy more like pretty last days ago. And I played more fantasy after I graduated from college because I had a little bit more time to myself, especially commuting. I ended up getting a full-time job that was like an hour plus commute. It's like, oh my God, like, how do I fill all this time? Fantasy podcasts. Oh, baby, fantasy podcasts. When I discovered fantasy podcasts, I was like, oh my God, my world is blown. So basically, it was, what content am I not listening to? Because I had so much time driving, commuting, and sitting in traffic going into Boston. So from the fantasy footballers, Roto World, Late Round QB, Roto Underworld podcast, like those are the kind of names that come on. And a lot of these are still around today. So again, I'm an avid listener to all those shows and a lot more shows as well that have kind of come and followed along the path that some of these earlier guys have really set for everyone else.
Well, you definitely selected some good ones that have
Yeah.
stuck around. I love that. Do you have a primary league that you consider like your main league right now?
Not really. I used to have one with my family, again, the one that I started with my dad, but that one kind of flamed out as people kind of like lost some interest. So I would say I really don't have a home league, which is kind of unfortunate. Even with some of my closest friends, they're not into fantasy as much as I am. So I do have a couple leagues here and there with people that I do know. And I ended up getting roped into, this really highly competitive, older gentlemen's league with one of my old roommates from college that I really don't ever talk to except for like in regards to this fantasy football league. So like, that league in particular, I think I would view as my home league because I've never won it. And every draft, I feel like my team is so good and I just always don't end up winning. And I really want to take home because people take that league way too seriously. And that's what I like. I like when people take it seriously. It's cutthroat a little bit. So that's the league that it's on CBS. And again, it's one of the things I hate about it though is they have very small rosters. So I always
Ooh,
feel like I have to cut really good
yeah.
players from my team. And it's like, God, like, why am I being penalized for having so many good players?
Yeah, those leagues, those short rosters, short benches are they kill me. Like they drive
Yeah.
me crazy, but they also fuel competition, right?
Yeah.
People, you got to be so selective on who you're cutting, and there's always somebody on the waiver wire, right? So that's kind of the good and the bad with those short rosters. So in that league or in any like industry league, is there one person that you consider like your biggest rival, like the person that you want to beat the most in fantasy?
So there is one league that I do share with a friend of mine. So that's actually one thing I really like about some fantasy leagues. I'm kind of want to do more of these where I have a shared team, right? So it's
Mhm.
like I'm working with a co-manager. I think it really helps, especially with how busy I am on Sunday mornings, scrambling, doing 12 different things. Like to have a co-manager, be like, hey, just check our starting team to make sure like we're not starting like guys on bye weeks because I don't want to be the reason why we lose because of something dumb like that. So there is in this one particular league, there's a guy named Deadpool. Don't know what his real name is, but his like avatar is Deadpool, and he beat us in the playoffs, I think a couple years ago with like an Amari Cooper, like nuclear game, like similar to what we saw from Amari Cooper this past year.
Yeah.
And I just never forgiven Deadpool for that. So it's like every time we play Deadpool, it's like, this is the guy we got to beat. Every time Deadpool loses, we celebrate. Every time he wins, we cry. So Deadpool, we're coming for you in 2024.
The best thing when if you don't even know their name, but you know their fantasy legacy, and it drives you crazy. That's awesome. I love that. Do you have favorite settings, formats in fantasy that you like to play with?
So for me, I'm really starting to open more up to Superflex. I really like the extra layer of strategy. It makes quarterbacks important, in my opinion. Again, I like the co-manager aspect. I think that having a co-manager is fun because you can kind of talk through trades with a co-manager and talk through waiver wire ads. It also just I think just it gives you an excuse to honestly talk to a friend too. It's like
Yeah.
especially if you like share a team with an old buddy, you talk to them once a week before you do waivers, do your trades for the week. I think that that's really fun. And honestly, I really like best ball too, especially just going. I'm again, as a fantasy analyst, like I'm super
Yeah.
busy, especially during the season. So it's like, if I don't have to set my roster, that would be ideal. And I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
it. So I do embrace the best ball life for sure.
And it's amazing for the off season too, right? Just cranking out those best ball teams. It helps you kind of get those reps in, get used to like where people are going. So best ball's great. But I love all that. So when it comes to just diving in and creating content, what inspired that? When you start getting involved in the industry?
So it was right after I graduated from college. So that was in 2016. So after that, I was, trying to find a full-time job. I got a marketing degree from my university that I graduated from. So obviously had some downtime because I didn't get a job right after school. So I worked as a substitute teacher for a lot of time, just kind of make some money while I was living at home. And I'd find that I had a lot of downtime. So it's like I just kind of started writing fantasy articles. Like I would literally be sitting in a room with a student with a what they call them now, these in-house suspensions where you're suspended but you go to school still, but you just like sit in a room with another person. They didn't have these when I went to school. When you were suspended, you were not going to school. Like you
Yeah.
were like, but now they have these in-house suspensions, I guess. So you go to school, but you just sit in a room from everybody else, and you can go to the bathroom and you get lunch, and that's it. So take advantage of all the downtime. I would write fantasy articles.
Okay.
And this is kind of what kind of got me into it. And then meeting Mitchell Renz, who I worked with at my real job. I met him and he told me he's the one that kind of like pulled back the curtain. I was like, this is fantasy Twitter. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? And I was just absolutely blown away by I just didn't know it existed. But Mitchell Renz, shout out to him, now working at Chat Sports. He's having a lot of success over there. He was
Go
definitely one of the
Raiders. Go Raiders.
Raider Nation, baby. Gotta love it. He was someone that really was integral to my upcoming in the fantasy space, and him and Mike Riggs, who got me my first kind of gig writing at Gridiron Experts, which was a website for fantasy football that I wrote at very, very early on in my fantasy career.
So from gridiron experts, to fantasy pros, like what happened in between that? What
So
led to getting the gig at Fantasy Pros?
yeah, so I did dabble also with fantasy data. Mike Riggs had a connection there, so that's where I got to hook up with like Jody Smith as another fantasy name. And then after that, it was okay. I went to FSGA, Fantasy Gaming Sports Association, and there I got to meet someone from formerly of PFF, Jeff Ratcliffe. So Jeff Ratcliffe, I had worked at PFF part time, not doing articles or anything like that, but doing like data analysis again as a way to get into the building. I didn't want to be a data collector for PFF. That was not my long-term goal, but I was like, I want to have a PFF affiliation because I respect what they do. It's a really big company. It's an up and coming company. Everyone knows what PFF is now. Everyone does.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be part of that in some way, shape, or form. And I got the chance to meet Jeff. He always talked about, again, he liked my ambition about how I would go to these conferences, and he would let me know, like, if things ever create opportunities for fantasy at PFF, that would be an opportunity that I'd be able to get. And lo and behold, that's where I ended up going. My first full-time job was at PFF in the fantasy space. Unfortunately, I did not get the chance to work with Jeff because immediately after I got hired, Jeff moved on to FTN. He didn't plan it that way. He tells me at least, but I didn't get to work with him for very long. And so I was at PFF for 2 years from 2020, or excuse me, from 2019 to 2021, right after the pandemic. So at the time I was working just like kind of a normal job in Boston. Pandemic happens. I get furloughed, no job. Okay, what am I going to do now? PFF started calling. It's like, hey, like we think there's gonna be a football season. Like, let's get you on. It's like, sounds good to me. I'm not doing anything right now. So I made that swap and that leap to PFF. And 2 years after that, I was able to make the swap over to Fantasy Pros. So again, super blessed for the opportunity to write about, talk about, film about, make videos about fantasy sports and now betting content as my full-time job. It's funny when people ask me like what I do for a living. It's like, well, I get to have fun like that. That's what I do. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity. And I try never to take it for granted. That's something that the great late Mike Tagliere, I think, really instilled in me as someone that was very inspirational to me and my upbringing. Again, I didn't mention it before, but Fantasy Pros. That was one of the podcasts and shows I listened to religiously. Obviously, with tags, now the crew has obviously changed a lot since those older days, but a lot of the behind the scenes people are still there. Like a lot of the developers, like were there during the tags, glory years. I guess the way I would say them. But yeah, that's kind of my journey, I guess, from company to company.
Yeah, heck of a journey. I mean, again, and it's you making things happen, right? Putting yourself in position to make things happen, and I mean, it's such an important lesson. It's simple. It's a simple concept, but yeah, things. You're right. Things just don't kind of come to you a lot of times. You gotta do something to put yourself in a position to find those avenues and travel that journey in the direction that you want to go. So, talk to me about the experience at Fantasy Pros. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been awesome. I just celebrated my 2-year anniversary yesterday. So officially been there for 2 years and it's been everything that I wanted it to be. Again, moving from PFF to Fantasy Pros, I thought that I took the right steps and put myself in a great position to just get more exposure. And I mean, I love the team, Fantasy Pros, Debro, Pat Morris, Sam Hoppin, Thor, Ryan Wormley, and of course, Joey P. I can't say enough about the entire team there, not even from the content side, but from everyone behind the scenes. I've just had it's been amazing to work there for the last 2 years. I'm looking forward to what we can bring in year 3.
It's awesome. So it's a great. I mean, obviously, it's an incredible team. You listed some amazing people. When it comes to like from a consumer perspective, if you could take a step back and look at Fantasy Pros, what is it that you love the most about the tools, features, and content that comes from Fantasy Pros?
Yeah, I think that we try to cater to our audience the best way we can. So giving them what they want. And that's part of like my role is like trying to figure out, okay, what are the best tools that we can offer to our consumers, whether it's premium or just someone like, hey, I just want help with my fantasy team. So I think the rankings are really effective with doing that. But then specifically to like what some of the off-season content that I like. So mock draft simulator, what we have now, we have rookie drafts for Dynasty. So it's like you can do a rookie draft, a rookie mock draft where Marvin Harrison Jr. will be there. And so like you can kind of see like, okay, I have these picks in my rookie draft. Who can I expect to get based on the rankings? So that's something that's new, mock draft simulator. We're hoping to get out soon. Some point is they're doing a real NFL draft mock simulator where you can do mock drafts of the NFL. That's something that's kind of in the works. So hopefully we'll get to see that. But Draft Wizard is super helpful during drafts. And then on the betting pro side, which is something that I got to dabble in more last year, the prop bet cheat sheet. Oh my God, it's a savior. I was literally the first thing I would do, like wake up after losing all my money on props and bets the week before. Like, right, I'm ready to move on. What are the next best bets for the next week? And the prop bet cheat sheet just like lays everything out. You have the prop bets, you have the projections and hit rates of the players. I think it's just an amazing tool. And it's something that I use like constantly in a lot of my betting analysis. So yeah, and we're continuing to grow with the tools. Like this is not, hey, you buy this tool and that's what you get. No, it's something that Fantasy Pros and betting pros are continuing to do. And the last thing I'll mention is the league sync. I think that's super helpful, especially with the amount of leagues that we play in nowadays. Like you need help. Like you can't do it by yourself. So it's either get a co-manager or get league sync because you're going to need help. I think it helps a lot with dynasty leagues because I just recently synced up my dynasty leagues to the league sync tool. And basically it gives you an overview of like what your team looks like. It's like, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? And it's coming from like a non-biased view. So they can actually tell you like, hey, like you think your receivers are good. They're not. Like, so and it can kind of help you get an idea of like, all right, you're not a contender. Like you need to build for the future. Or it's like, hey man, you're one piece away, time to make a trade. And I think one of the best tools is actually the trade finder, trade analyzer, where it'll give you trade ideas to send out to your league mates. So gone are the days of like, all right, I spent like 3 hours trying to figure out a trade that got rejected in 5 seconds because we don't have time for that. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that's listening right now that's thought of this amazing trade that you thought, okay, benefits both sides. You check off all the boxes. Then immediately gets rejected. And you're like, well, there goes the 90 minutes of my life I'll never get back. With the trade, with this trade tool, it gives you all those trades right off the bat. So you can fire them off and spend less time trying to like get trades to happen and making trades actually happen and execute.
That's awesome. Yeah. So again, incredible tools, features, but the bottom line is great people, right? Great content, people that know their stuff, but good people. So definitely highly recommend you checking out Fantasy Pros and getting all the great content that they create. And that, they're a great example of people within the community. We've been to like the Fantasy Football Expo. You've been there. You met a lot of people. What's it been like going to the expo? What was it like to first kind of meet people that you've never met before in person? Talk to me about your expo experience.
Well, I mean, it's definitely uncomfortable to start because you're meeting all these people that you thought looked like Twitter avatars that, they actually look like humans in real life. But that's what makes it exciting. You got to get out of your comfort zone. A lot of us now that we've transitioned to, again, I work from home. So again, it's really easy for me to like, stay in my lazy state, stay in some sweats and not go outside and not interact with people, stay in my comfort zone. But you got to step out of your comfort zone. Like that's how you grow. That's how you develop. That's how you become a better version of yourself. And that's what I learned by going to my first expo. And I remember talking to, at the time, Alex Caruso, who was going to his first expo. And he's someone that, I feel like I've kind of seen, I feel like he's a person that I've given back to in terms of, I know a lot of people helped me along my journey. And I feel like I helped Alex get to the point where he is. Obviously, he's done amazing work on his own, but I feel like I did open the door a little bit for him. And I remember him saying to me, man, I feel kind of nervous. Like, I was like, man, like, you're supposed to feel this way. Like, that means
Yeah.
you're doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, like, you just got to go up and talk to people. And what are they going to say? What are they going to be like? Oh, no, screw you. Like, screw off. Like, no, they're going to be welcoming. They're like, hey, like, happy to talk to you. Happy to chat. They're there for a reason too. So I think that we sometimes get caught in our own minds about things. You can stress out about certain things, but it's like, we're all nerds, man. Like we're all into fantasy football. Like nobody's scary. No one's gonna bite your head off. If they do, then you don't talk to that person next time. Like it's that simple. So
Yeah.
yeah, the expo again was always something that was a little nerve wracking for me, but that to me felt like, okay, I'm making the right decision here. I'm doing the right thing by stepping out of my comfort zone because, I'll have to tell you this, like every time I would come back from these conferences, I always felt like I was on cloud nine, like every single time, whether it was like on the train back, on the flight back, I always felt so proud of myself. And it's like, you know what, even if I didn't get a job or an offer or whatever, like I made the connections. And immediately when I got home, it was like, follow-ups, like all the business cards, just sent out email, like, hey, thanks for meeting. Hey, thanks for meeting. And then, hey, some things turned into nothing. Sometimes I didn't get responses, but anyway, I did everything I could in my power to make those opportunities for me. And luckily I got lucky one time. And that's the end of the day. Like you only got to get lucky once. And, I was fortunate enough to get lucky.
I love it. Getting lucky is great. FSGA is coming to Boston. I don't know if you heard that, but that in the summer conference is in Boston. So hopefully you can get yourself there. But I've heard also heard some rumors that Fantasy Pros might be having a bigger commitment or presence in Canton for the expo. So hopefully, I don't know if is that true? Has there been some talk about people going?
I think so. I mean, I would have been there last year, but I got COVID, so I I could not go. I was planning on going. I had tickets, but again, I did the right thing because the last thing I wanted to do was get everybody sick. Like like you guys would have been, I would have been canceled on X. So
Yeah.
didn't want to do that, so I stayed home. But I lived it vicariously through my Fantasy Pros team members, and hopefully this year, if I stay healthy, I'll be there.
Sounds like a plan. I love it. Let's dive into some rapid fire questions. I'll just throw out some questions. You just tell me what first comes to mind. Your answers don't have to necessarily be rapid fire, but I'll throw out some questions. What do you love most about playing the game of fantasy? What about the fantasy experience?
For me, it's roster building, and I love the game theory behind some of the strategies, and I like the overlap with real NFL and fantasy, and kind of finding that like disconnect where it's like running backs in real life, nobody cares. Running backs in fantasy, the lifeblood.
I love it. What's been your biggest challenge, most difficult challenge thus far in your career so far?
I would say, continuing to grow and cater my content to more of the niche fantasy games like best ball, like dynasty. Again, I never want to spread myself too thin, but I want to have exposure. It's weird because I don't want to spread myself too thin, but I want to have exposure to all the assets. But at the same time, it's like, well, if I'm not like quote unquote expert on all the fields, like then what am I really offering? Is it better for me to just focus on this one thing versus spreading myself too thin. That's something that I'm trying to always kind of constantly juggle as all these new games develop seemingly every single year.
What do you enjoy most about what you're doing in the industry right now?
I think for me, it's just the fact that I can dedicate all my time and energy to something that I'm super passionate about, and that I can provide an escape for individuals that view fantasy sports as their leisure. Like, this is something that's fun that they do. They listen to podcasts because it's not work for them. Because that's what I did. I listened to fantasy podcasts commuting because it was something that would take me away from work, and that's something that I always try to remind myself of. Like, hey, like, I'm somebody's entertainment. Like, that's really what I'm doing here. Again, people want me to be accurate, and that's all good and fun, but I can be as wrong as possible, but if I'm entertaining along the way, people will keep listening to me. So it's,
Absolutely.
if anything, it's like just fade my picks, but have fun enjoying the show. I've done a good day of work.
That's true. I mean, the more good energy you bring, you're putting that into someone's life. I love that answer. What are your favorite hobbies and activities outside of fantasy sports?
Yeah, so for me, it's pretty typical of a 29-year-old working out, eating food. I like video games. I like going to breweries. I'm past my going out scene of like going to clubs and stuff. Now it's like, hey, let's go to a brewery at like 4 p.m. and be back by 7 so we can watch dinner and go to bed by 10. Like, that's kind of like, that's my ideal like Saturday night. So for me, yeah, basic stuff like that.
Nice. Now, once upon a time, you had a background in bodybuilding, right? What did you learn most about that? Your time doing that?
Yeah, the discipline that it takes, the preparation, the focus, and I think that the best thing that I learned from it was that you are more capable of what or you're more than capable of what you think you can do. Like, you think that you can probably only do something up to some certain point, but there are levels that you can push yourself to that are beyond what you even a dream of. So my words of wisdom would be to like continue to push yourself, and you be surprised how far you can get.
Great advice. Great advice. What was the last TV show that you binged?
So I watched the Blackberry movie, which was like split up into 3 parts, which I guess I'm not sure if it was a show or was a movie. I actually had a debate in my mind, like, am I watching the movie or the show? Like, what do I do? So that was, I guess, the movie that I binged. But then the show that I've actually binged recently was the TED Show, which I really enjoyed, honestly. Like, it kind of looked weird on the surface because, again, it wasn't Mark Wahlberg, and it wasn't
Yeah.
a guy that looked like Mark Wahlberg in any way. It just looked like some teenager. But it was really funny, and I thought it was actually better than like at least the second Ted movie. But I really enjoyed it on Peacock.
Now that's a prequel, right? I haven't seen it yet.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's a prequel. The setting is Ted during the oh my god, I can't remember his name. Mark Wahlberg's character as a high schooler.
I mean, what's better than that? I love it. What's your all-time favorite show?
For me, I view this as like a comfort show. So for me, it's Modern Family. I don't know. There's like something about that show that just makes me feel like really comfortable. Like, I just turn it on. It's like eating like a bowl of mac and cheese, just like watching Modern Family.
I love it. What's your all-time favorite movie?
So again, I had to pick multiple answers because there's always comes with a caveat. So for like comedies, it's Shrek. I really love the movie Shrek. 21 Jump Street is my other favorite comedy.
It's
And
good.
then the like more serious movie, like this movie I think is just good. It's like critically acclaimed. Would be The Dark Knight. Love that movie.
Okay. Nice, nice. How about an all-time favorite sports movie?
For me, again, put 2 again because of course I'm breaking all the rules. Remember the Titans is my favorite sports movie, and then a movie that I think just doesn't get enough recognition. And every time I bring it up to my fiance, she's like, "This movie looks stupid," but I love it. Is Cool Runnings, featuring
That's
John
great.
Candy. I think
Yeah,
I think it's an underrated sports movie. It's about the Jamaican bobsled team. I think it's fantastic.
it's great. Great family movie. We watched that just a few months ago. It's good. I love it. How about a favorite band, musician, or artist?
Dave Matthews Band. There's
Nice.
never a bad time, in my opinion, to listen to Dave Matthews, someone that I've seen multiple times live. So love Dave.
Nice. So what are you most grateful for at this time?
For me, it's my fiance, Taylor. I'm going to be, and this dovetails nicely into the next question of off-season plans. I'm getting married in June to Taylor, my fiance. We've been engaged for over 2 years. We've been together since 2012. So it's been a while. We've been together, and I'm grateful for her because she was there during my kind of like darkest periods where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and I wanted to chase this passion in fantasy sports. And with that, again, it comes a lot of financial sacrifice where, I was resetting my career. that comes from a salary standpoint, and that's something that's really sometimes hard to do with your partner, where you can't do certain things because of the fact that, oh, well, we don't have the compensation to do so. That's what happens when you reset your career at, age 25 versus you're starting your career once you graduate from college and you continue to go up and up and up. You know, Not everyone would do that for me. So that's something I'm always conscious of in the back of my mind, that without her, I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity, or else I just would have been alone the entire time, which would have been much less less enjoyable. But she's always stuck with me through the bad times and the good times. And I know she's proud of where I've been able to get to. And I'm always in the back of my mind trying to make sure that I'm taking advantage of every opportunity that she's been able to give me. And I'm hoping I can return the favor in marriage as her husband.
There you go. I mean, there's nothing better than support like that. I'm excited for you. That's wonderful news. That definitely makes for an exciting off
Yeah,
season. That's for sure.
exactly.
How about on the NFL offseason front? And obviously, it's kind of roller coaster. A lot of different points of the NFL offseason that are fun. What's your favorite time of the NFL offseason?
Man, I just love them all. I think for me, and again, this is going back to my upbringing and in my draft, in my chase of a job in the NFL. It was during draft season that I always kind of think back to. It was listening to podcasts during draft. I don't know why, and it's that 2018 draft. Or I believe it was 2018, whatever draft Kyler Murray was in. He was picked first overall. That's when it became prominent for me to be like, I want to go all out to try to find a job in the fantasy sports industry. That's when I went to Nashville to the NFL draft.
Draft,
And that's where I
okay.
got to meet Mike Tagliere, the Fantasy Pros team. And it's so funny because this year our team trip is in Nashville. We're going back. So I'm
Nice.
already thinking about the nostalgia that's going to flood my brain about like being back here. When I first went there, I was a broke college kid that was sleeping in a hostel that doesn't even exist. That hostel doesn't even exist anymore because it got bombed. It's completely
Jeez.
gone. But that's where
Crazy.
I stayed when I went to Nashville for the draft. But I got the chance to meet Mike Tagliere, and he just voiced so much words of inspiration to me. And I'm really looking forward to like going back to that rooftop bar that I met him at and be like, yeah, this is where Tagliere met me. He talked to me. He's like, you're going to be the next big thing. And I was like, I'm not going to let you down. And I feel like at least I've tried to keep up my end of the bargain. And yeah, so this time of the year, I think is leading up to the draft, I think is actually probably one of my favorites during the NFL offseason because it brings me back to my chase and my grind towards getting to where I am today. And especially with that specific draft class, it's so
Yeah.
iconic to me because it's like the Patriots drafted N'Keal Harry. He was a mega bust, and they could have drafted AJ Brown or Debo Samuel, who are just these like absolute like stud wide receivers. But that draft in particular, really kind of fueled my love for the NFL draft overall, prospecting, and really kind of helped kind of get me where I am today.
It's cool. It's so cool to have those memories tied to it, and the different layers to that. Exciting times. I'm excited for you to hear about the trip to Nashville for Fantasy Pros. I love it. But speaking of the draft, any players that you're really excited to see kind of find a home this off season at the NFL draft?
Yeah, so I got two guys, so a receiver and a running back. So Xavier Worthy is a wide receiver that I'm really interested in. Now he's one of these smaller guys, 6'1", 172 pounds. But to me, it kind of looks like the next Tank Dell, but like a little bit bigger than Tank Dell. He was an early breakout at age 18. And the thing that stuck out to me, just looking at some of the PFF numbers. So last year in college football, Worthy was the number one punt returner and kick returner in special teams for PFF. The year before, it was Tank Dell. I mean, come on, man. Like you can't make those similarities are uncanny between those two players. So again, I looked at Worthy, I watched some of his film, was like, is this guy just bigger Tank Dell? Like, come on, let's roll. So I like Xavier Worthy from Texas. And then the other guy I liked a lot was Audric Estime from Notre Dame, the running back. Super efficient last year, over 225 touches. He's got ideal size, 5'11", 227 pounds. And one metric that I look at the most when it comes to running backs as prospects, and then looking at them towards the NFL, is yards per play or yards per snap. Basically, like how efficient are you when you're on the field, essentially?
Yeah.
Like how many yards are you generating, whether it's a rush, whether it's a reception. And that's something that I found works really well with some of these later guys, like players that checked off the box here. Ramondre Stevenson was really good in this metric. Elijah Mitchell was really good in this metric. So again, it's something that I've kind of gravitated towards as something that I look at when I'm like, all right, how can my rankings stand out? Like, it's just something that I found that works. And Audric Estime was second best in the class in that particular metric yards per play. So he kind of checks off a lot of boxes, and it doesn't really seem like he's in this running back class where there's no like front runner. Again, I've seen like 5 or 6 different rankings with a different guy at number 1. If Estime is the guy that you can get late in your rookie drafts, like that's someone I'm going to be scooping up a lot of, especially in, second round picks and rookie drafts.
There you go. I can't wait. It's so fun this time of year because you do put in a ton of research into uh, these players, and you don't know where they're going to be. So landing spot just kind of takes it to another level of like who landed in the right spot, and it's exciting to hear these names. But obviously, there's so much more to come when it comes to the combine and all the workups here. But it's exciting. I personally I love the draft a ton. Obviously, free agency is another thing that's coming up pretty soon. Any hot takes, hot predictions when it comes to where you might find some of these players land?
All right, I got 4 picks, 1 at each position. So
Okay.
quarterback, Kobe Brissett is coming back, baby. He's going to be a New England Patriot. He's coming back to the Patriots. Josh Jacobs is going to be a Houston Texan, and he's going to
Ooh.
reunite with Ben McDaniels, Josh McDaniels' brother, who is on staff with the Houston Texans. Darnell Mooney is going to be a Chief, reuniting him with Matt Nagy, former
Okay.
Bears head coach, and the Chiefs just need receivers, and he's fast. So
Yeah.
to the moon, Darnell Mooney. And last but not least, Noah Fant, after being desolated in Seattle the last 2 seasons, going to go to the Carolina Panthers with Dave Canales, and they're going to use him the right way, and he's going to become Bryce Young's Binky, potentially the next Evan Ingram. There we go.
I love it. Exciting times. Again, there's so much story to be told over this off season. Nothing gets official until those players get on the field in September. When it comes to truly what the mark they make on the field is. But so much excitement in the off season. It's fun to talk and speculate and go through all this stuff. So exciting stuff ahead for sure. It's obviously been fun again. I mentioned before, just to see your journey. Can you name some of the people that have just had the biggest impact on you during your journey in rise in this industry?
Yeah, so starting from the top, so Mitchell Renz, Mike Riggs. Mitchell Renz, I met famously in the bathroom of our marketing department, and it was from there that he introduced me to fantasy Twitter, and my entire life changed. And I remember I was so focused on being like, all right, I'm going to follow these people, and they're going to follow me, and I'm going to unfollow them. I was convinced that this was the ultimate way to get followers on Twitter.
Oh, funny.
Oh God, just some of the stuff that we did. But those 2 guys definitely got my introduction into the fantasy sports realm. So I'm forever thankful for both of those 2. And then obviously some of the names that more people are familiar with. Mike Tagliere, of course, formerly of Fantasy Pros. God rest his soul. Jeff Ratcliffe from PFF. Someone that I've looked up to a lot throughout the industry. Never got the chance to really work with Jeff just because we've never really overlapped for very long at any one place. But anytime I see him, it's always a good time. And he's always, talks about how, proud he is to see where I've gotten to where I've gotten. And that, he's like, I knew you were going to be something. Like, I knew you were going to do something good. So always thankful for that. And then, of course, with my current stomping ground, Joe Pisapia. Joe was one of the guys I remember meeting at one of the FSGAs. Like, again, putting yourself out there. Like, I was in this room with a bunch of guys. I had no idea who any of them were. And I recognized Joe because he was in one of our retweet groups, one of my thousands of retweet groups that you had on Twitter, where we would just basically just send articles and hope that people would retweet them. So Joe Pisapia, again, obviously of the Fantasy Black Book, I recognized him for that. I was like, hey, you're Joe, right? And so that's why I sat down. So I wasn't awkwardly just standing there by myself. Joe, I obviously get to work with at Fantasy Pros, and he's a big reason why I'm at Fantasy Pros. He advocated for me because he started there before I did, advocated for me to join the team after obviously what happened to Tags, and obviously after they didn't have Yates anymore as well. So so those are really, there's a lot more people,
Sure.
but those are the ones that come to mind first of all. But yeah, I mean, this space is filled with so many great people and individuals that I know that you can. I try never to get jealous. I really look at it as a chance to, and this goes for everything. If you feel jealous, try to rework it as don't feel jealous, feel inspired. That's the way I try to view it. It's success isn't a one-way street. People can have success, and that means you can have success too. So, but yeah, with those people specifically, I owe a lot to them.
That's awesome. When you bring up Joe Pisapia there, was that New York FSGA 2019
Yes.
summertime?
Yep.
Yeah. I remember being in that room. So
Yeah, I
I
was like,
think that's
this is an awkward room. A lot of big names here, and I don't know anybody.
that was good. Good times for sure. Good times. What advice do you have for people that are wanting to kind of follow your footsteps and get into the industry or create content and find their path?
Yeah. So again, I probably hit on it multiple times throughout, but just it's about making opportunities. Don't wait for one. No one's stopping you from making a podcast and recording it right now. No one's stopping you because the minute that the opportunity is created is therefore you want to be ready for it. So you want to already have those reps in. So if you want to be a podcaster, make podcasts. If you want to be a TikToker, make TikToks. You don't have to be being paid to do these things. Get the reps in now so that when the time comes, you're ready to go.
Perfect. Perfect advice. Anything that we haven't covered that you want to share before we close things out?
No, I mean, I think we kind of hit it all. I mean, I do think that this year is interesting from the draft perspective with the Patriots picking third overall. And people keep asking me, like, what I want the Patriots to do. And I'm like, I don't know. I still haven't decided what they want to do. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what I want them to do. And so you're just going to have to get back to me on it.
Anything but Marvin Harrison Jr.,
See, that's the thing
please.
that I think like non-Patriots fans want that because they're like, oh, they're going to ruin him. And I'm like, yeah, but like he's really good. Like I think it'd be cool to like have a because they haven't had like a marquee receiver like that in
Yeah.
forever. Like
Uh,
since Edelman, Moss, like they haven't had the guy at wide receiver for such a long time. And maybe that's how they rebrand. Again, Robert Kraft's got to sell tickets. Like I didn't go to a Patriots game this past year for the first time since the COVID year. And I wasn't like sad about it. So give me a reason, Joe. Give me a reason, Robert Kraft, to go watch the Patriots. And I don't know if Joe Alt is going to get that done. Just saying.
We'll see. We'll see. So tell the listeners, viewers, where to find you.
Yeah, so I am at Andrew Erickson _ on X, on Instagram, on TikTok, etc. All the social media platforms. It's at Andrew Erickson _ and all my written work, podcasts, videos can be found on Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros on the respective YouTube channels. So yeah, big things happening at Fantasy Pros. Took a bigger step into Betting Pros, as you guys can see behind me. They're watching the video. Our betting sister site to Fantasy Pros. But yeah, we are gearing up for another fun off season. Again, the NFL does never sleeps. It's crazy that people ask me, "Oh, like you're taking some time off now." I'm like, not really, because like there's other stuff you could just do because the NFL has taken over every single day of the year. We don't really get a break anymore. But hey, that's how I keep the lights on around here.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. Always a thrill to catch up with you. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on here, and I can't wait to see what's ahead of you in 2024, my friend.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.